Welcome to the Folktale Project. This is Dan Scholz. Today we have our final of Alexander's Tales from Jewish Fairy Tales and Legends by Aunt Naomi. And in this tale, we learn really about the rest of the world, coming through the greatness of King Alexander. This is The Wonders of the World. One day, a strange rumbling noise was heard, and toward evening the army halted by the side of a river even more mysterious than the river of life. It was not a river of water, but of sand and stones. It flowed along with a roaring sound, and every few minutes great stones were shot up into the air. Alexander asked the Jewish soldier if he could explain. "This," said the Jew, "is the Sambatyon, the river which ceases to flow on the Sabbath."
"And what lies beyond?"
"The land of the lost 10 tribes of Israel," was the answer. "None has seen this country."
"Cannot the river then be crossed?" said Alexander.
"Not by all who wish to cross."
The next day was Friday, and Alexander waited until the evening to see what would happen. An hour before sunset, at the time of the commencement of Sabbath, the river ceased to flow. The rumbling died down, and the Sambatyon appeared like a broad expanse of shining yellow sand. "Tomorrow I shall cross with my army," said Alexander. But next morning the Sambatyon was enveloped in dense, black clouds. Alexander could not see a yard in front of him, and when he ventured onto the sand, the horses sank into it. Flames were also seen in the clouds. After the sun had set and the Sabbath had ended, the clouds cleared away, the rumbling began again, and the sand flowed once more like a river. Alexander was disappointed for a while, but at last he consoled himself with the thought that he had conquered the whole world. "Now I must carry out my project of ascending above the clouds and afterwards descending into the sea," he said, and he proceeded to carry out the instructions given to him in Jerusalem. 4 huge eagles were caught and chained to a big box. At the end of the box was a pole, and on the end of each of these a brilliant jewel was placed. When all was in readiness, Alexander entered the box and carefully closed the doors. "Thus did Nimrod ascend into the sky," he said. "But he was a fool. He shot arrows into the air, and when the angels returned them stained with blood, he thought he had killed God. I desire only to see the heavens, not to conquer them." He gave the signal, and the heads of the eagles chained to the poles were uncovered. The moment they saw the dazzling jewels, they tried to snatch them, but could not. So they continued to rise higher and higher until the box was carried above the clouds. By looking through the windows at the top and bottom of the box, Alexander could see how high he was. For a long time he saw nothing but clouds, which appeared like a vast sea beneath him. But when these cleared away, he saw the earth again. So high was he that the world looked like a ball. Until then, he had not known the earth was round. The seas enveloping the greater part of the globe looked like writhing serpents. "Now I can understand," he said, "why the wise rabbis say that the great fish, the Leviathan, surrounds the world with its tail in its mouth." Then he looked above. The sun seemed further away than ever. "Heaven is not so near as I thought," he said. And seeing himself but a tiny speck miles above the earth and still farther away from the heavens, he grew afraid for the first time in his life. With a stick, he knocked the jewels from the poles outside the box, and the eagles, seeing them no longer, began to descend. Alexander breathed more freely when he was safe on the ground again, but he would not tell his generals what he had seen. "Wait until I have descended into the sea," he said. Under his orders, a diving bell of clear, thick glass bound with iron had been constructed. Alexander entered the bell. All the joints were then tightly secured with pitch, and the bell lowered from a ship into the ocean by means of chains. Before he entered, Alexander took the precaution to put on a magic ring, which his wife, Roxana, had sent him. This, she said, would protect him against the monsters of the deep. Down, down into the watery deep sank the bell, and for some time Alexander could see nothing. When his eyes grew accustomed to the strange greenish light, he noticed multitudes of queer fish darting around the bell. Many were of a shape never conjectured by man. Some were so tiny that he could scarcely see them, and others so large that one of these monsters actually tried to swallow the bell. But Alexander showed the magic ring which glowed like a blazing star, and the monster darted away. So deep down sank the bell that no light could at last penetrate from the sun. Most of the fish, however, were luminous, and Alexander was almost dazzled by the changing of the brilliant lights as the denizens of the deep swam swiftly around the bell. Shells of wondrous beauty did he see, together with pearls of great size. The treasures of the deep were revealed to him, and he saw that the riches on land were as nothing compared with them. He saw the coral insects at their work of building, and plants of entrancing beauty growing in the oozy bed of the ocean. "I wonder," said Alexander, "if I dare venture forth and take some of these beautiful gems back with me. The ring will protect me." Alexander was one of the bravest men that ever lived, and he immediately set about trying to open the bell. In doing so, he rattled the chains by which it was lowered, and Robus, the officer in charge, took this as a signal to raise the bell. In his excitement, he dropped the chains into the sea, and they fell with a big crash on the bell and smashed it to pieces. When Robus saw what had happened, he cast himself into the sea in a gallant endeavor to rescue his master. Down below, in the glittering depths of the ocean, Alexander saw the fish hurrying away in great fear, and he heard the rattling of the chains as they dropped through the water. He looked up and saw them crash on the bell. A terrible buzzing sound filled his ears, 1,000 dazzling colors danced before his eyes and made him giddy. With great presence of mind, he remembered his ring, and immediately a big fish swam underneath him, raised him from the wreckage of the bell, and rose swiftly to the surface. Alexander emerged, just as Robus dived into the sea. At once he showed the fish his ring, and it dived and brought his gallant officer safe to his side. "I have seen enough," said Alexander when he was safe on land, "more than mortals should see. I have learned that the earth is for man, and that the air above and the waters beneath are for the other and more wonderful creatures of God." He made preparations to return to Macedon, but his army was wearied with the long marching, and begged of him to let them rest. Accordingly, he halted outside Babylon. Sickness seized him, but he remembered the warning of the rabbis and would not enter the city. For days He wandered around until his soldiers showed signs of mutiny. Then, throwing caution to the winds, Alexander entered Babylon. At once, his illness took a serious turn, and in a few days he died. When the Jews heard the news, they mourned him sincerely, for they knew they had lost a good friend. All that remains as a memorial of Alexander is the city of Alexandria, which he founded in Egypt. It stands to this day. And that is part 3 of King Alexander's adventures. The Wonders of the World. This tale really does tell us of the wonders of the world after giving Alexander that last unsurmountable task of crossing to discover the land of the lost 10 tribes of Israel. And really does a wonderful job of describing the world. The means of his travel are very steampunky. The eagles supporting the box, lured by jewels to discover the skies. The diving bell, but gigantic, large enough for him to walk around inside. And still, he uses it to discover the last of the world that he has not seen. This is Dan Scholes for the Folktale Project. Don't forget that you can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, Overcast, anywhere you like to get your podcasts. You can follow us on Twitter at Folktale Project. You can find us on Auto Radio, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, Spotify, anywhere that you like to listen. And you can always head over to folktaleproject.com, where you'll find a new story waiting for you every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Don't forget that you can help support the podcast and keep it ad-free by heading over to patreon.com/folktaleproject, where, for as little as $1 a month, you can get early access to every story told. Next week, we'll be back with 3 new tales. As always, thank you so much for listening.